So for the foundation, this year and halfway into last year, we always find that, and it's something that I've also always said in all my talks and everything, is that we are living in a society where we are teaching people how not to be raped or abused, as opposed to teaching people not to do it in the first place. So it's like you handing out free plasters instead of teaching people how not to fall over in the first place. So for us, our main focus, oddly enough, around Women's Day and around the whole gender-based violence, because it is so big in the media, and I mean, our president spoke about it and everything, is we've actually flipped it and we're focusing on the men. And we're running a mentorship program. We are on our 4th one now, and it's all about teaching men about consent. And for us, I mean, we do a questionnaire in the beginning where we say to all these men, do you know what consent is? And every single one of them tick yes. And then we say to them, right, and we give them scenarios. So we'll say, okay, so you take a girl out for dinner, it's a very fancy restaurant, you buy her all the drinks she wants, you pay for the meal, you drive her home, and everything. Do you now have the right to sleep with her? And most of them say, well, yeah. So then we say, no, so you actually don't understand consent. Because just because you've paid for the meal, you've paid for everything, you've driven her around, you blah, 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 that does not mean you have the right to sleep with her. At the end of the day, it's whether she says yes or no. That's it. And whether she's in the right mind to say yes or no also counts. So we focus on that. We focus on their own sexuality, their own bullying, their own pressure, their own, everything that goes on with peer pressure is another huge one. Gangs, all these sorts of things. We do a full year's course with these guys, and it truly has. Honestly, in the beginning, I thought, are we going to make a difference, or they're all going to sit there rolling their eyes and think, shut up, you're only a woman, what do you know? We found 4 incredible men in 4 different areas that we work with, and we're now working with these men, and it has been incredible to see their differences. And also we don't go in and get the prefects and the A students and all of that. We try and get the naughty boys. I get into trouble when I call them that. But we look for the ones who are bunking class, or the ones who maybe don't have the greatest home situation. And one of the ones we actually ran at Hillcrest High. And when I went back to do a talk, I was greeted at the gate by a prefect who was previously one of our mentees. And he came up to me and he said, that course changed my life. I was on the wrong path, and now I've realized what it is to be a real man. And he's now a prefect at the school. So that was very heartwarming for us to see. And another boy in Hammersdale has just built a house for an old man in Hammersdale. He went and took it upon himself to get the community together to build a house for this man. So it's really changing their mindsets. And also, for me, I think a lot of these young men are coming from a home environment where, first of all, most of them don't even have a male role model, or if they do, he's not the best. So he's coming home drunk, he's beating mom, and also a lot of these communities, everybody's in the same room. So, from a young age, these boys are watching mom and dad do the dirty while they are in the bed next door. So they think, well, that's what you do. So when they're alone with another person, they think, well, that's what I've got to do, because nobody's explained it to them. Nobody's taken the time to show them what it is to be a real man. So yeah, for us, it's a very different angle, but for us, it's very much around the men. As I think someone mentioned earlier, that so many of the posts are women. And it's so true. I was looking through my Facebook earlier, and it's all my friends posting, saying to all the women, I've got probably 40 messages on WhatsApp, and all of them are from women. I haven't got one message from a man to say Happy Women's Month, or you're a strong woman, or whatever. It's all women. And I think that's why we need to start teaching these men, what it is. And also, you'll find when a woman looks after children all day, every day, cooks supper, does everything, it's taken for granted. And then if a man babysits and cooks supper, it's, oh my gosh, what an incredible man. He cooks you dinner. He's amazing. Oh, did he look after the children? Why? In this day and age, women are working full-time jobs. Men are working full-time jobs. What makes it the norm for women to do it? But then as soon as a man does it, everyone praises him. So I think that's also something, it's a stigma that we need to break, especially in our day and age.
Jess, like, I absolutely love what you're doing and your organization making so much change. It's showing that men are capable of change and they can do amazing things when they're aware and like also are willing to change and realize that they're wrong in their thinking. But as Taylor said, it was only like mainly women posting about Women's Day, but it's also mainly women posting about gender-based violence. And that's the problem. Like, Jess got men to join her organization, but there's so many men that aren't willing to show up. And it's men in our circles. Yes, they can say they're woke, but do they really understand? I don't think so. And I don't think they're educating themselves enough as well, because I do agree with Jess where it is now the man's responsibility. Women probably have 3 or 4 self-defense things that they know in the back of their head. They probably have a pepper spray in their handbag now. So yeah, it is the responsibility of men. And as Jess said, like, we're in a society where we're so happy when men are doing the bare minimum. You know what I mean? It's self-respect and not treating women badly and respecting her space and respecting her. It shouldn't be something that's this amazing concept for men. It should be something that's just given, you know what I mean? And that's the society we're in right now. And while the president also talked about gender-based violence in his conversations, he talked about it last year, saying that rapists won't get bail. And then they were bailed out for like 2,000 Rand. You know, so we fought, we protested last year when the thing with Uyunene happened. And basically all the men on my social media had that one image. I said, women don't owe you shirts. But then what else did they do? They reposted a story, and it doesn't mean anything if they post one story, not recognizing the struggle, not realizing what they're contributing. Maybe it's not an extreme, but the way they don't check their male friends' behavior. And they say they do, but I really don't think it's to the extreme that where women want it to be. And I still don't think men are showing up as much as they should be. And yeah, I just think it is more calling to men, and that they need to be aware, and also they need to be willing to change and need to show up.
Of that, yeah. I think, yeah, I relate as well. Like, you see men like, I'm not part of the problem. Like, I'm not doing the act, so like there's nothing more I can do. I just have to carry on being a good man, right? And I don't think they understand by just being a man in like a world that's so built on the patriarchy, there's so much more that they can do. And then I think that's the really frustrating part. They see it almost as an other issue. They're like, I'm not the one raping, I'm not the one in a domestic violence situation, therefore I'm not part of the problem. This is a poor people problem. I'm rich, this is not my problem, right? And they might not say those words, but I see this all the time, and I think that's the frustrating part. So it's great, Jess, that you've turned the tone, because gender-based violence isn't a woman's issue, it's a human issue, right? Yeah. Okay, Zama?
Yes, building off of what you just said, I also think that it's important that we focus on the language we use when we speak about gender-based violence. Like what Jess was saying, the focus does need to be on men as the perpetrators. For example, I really don't like how we'll hear of a horrendous act and then we'll say, oh my word, what an evil person, what a monster, instead of saying that was a man. Because as everyone was saying, we need to recognize that it's the patriarchal attitudes, it's the society that we bring up boys in that enables them and that like makes them end up being able to perform such horrendous acts. It's not monsters, it's not evil, it's the men, it's our brothers, it's our fathers. And that's why we all kind of need to turn our focus towards that, towards building like a society of men that firstly see women as human, because I really find that the patriarchal attitude kind of dehumanizes us, and that's what makes men, not what makes men, but it results in the horrific acts.
I hate it when the people make jokes where they're meant to be jokes about I don't even know what, like not necessarily things, but just certain phrases that people will use, where you use your language and you just kind of throw it around, and those types of things, it desensitizes the situation, and it kind of, even if you, deep in their mind, the issue wasn't that, it was a harmless joke. It's one of those things where those types of that type of language and that type of discourse needs to be stopped in its tracks. And I think it's up to any woman, whether you feel like, oh, you don't think this is an issue, or any man who's, it might be difficult for them to speak up about it. I mean, in a group of men or whoever you come across as, I don't know what, like sensitive or girly or like a wet towel. But I think those types of things need to be stopped in their tracks, because it's like a broken telephone, and that kind of gets misconstrued as well, as like these types of jokes are okay, these types of actions are okay. And I think it's about mindset. Like I think Bhavni was saying last year with the with Uyanene's death and all those things, and it's like you realize that it's such a, some of my friends would ask me, my male friends would be like, you know, I think they told me and a few of my other girlfriends, like, if you need someone to walk you to your car at night, and this is like on campus, obviously, like, we're here for you, or even broad daylight. Like, I think the situation, as unfortunate as it was and still is, it kind of brought some sort of, it opened up that conversation. And I think a lot of people realize that women don't necessarily have the same safety privileges that men do. And I think it was an eye-opener to a lot of people, especially men that were like in their own bubble. So I think there are some men out there that are changing things about themselves, and I think that's a good start. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to lead on from that. I think in South Africa, we as women carry an immense amount of fear, and this gender-based violence is like ingrained in us. We're constantly having to look past our shoulders, and I find over our shoulders. And I find if you question men about stuff we do so naturally, like letting a friend know when we get home, you know, waiting inside the gate before the Uber stops outside, so you're not outside the road. You ask them, have you ever done that? And then I think that gets that conversation going. They start realizing that this is a societal way of being. Like, this fear of violence is so ingrained in everything we do as women in this country, and it's disgusting. I think the other thing is, like, you know, I think it 100% starts with the men. I think we need role models. Like, I think, you know, all this money going to gender-based violence, like, why is this all going to, you know, to survivor systems, to supporting women post? Like, it needs to go to that as well. But majority of that, I think, needs to go to mentorship programs. Like, every high school should have like a gender-based violence workshop sort of idea that explains consent. And yeah, I think it is just such a societal rot in this country. And it's the one thing that really makes me hopeless. You know, it's the one thing that I'm like, this is so deep. And so it's so many levels. It's in our bones. It's everything. And I think another thing to like just point out is that it's not just, you know, people think it's these monsters, you know, like Summer was saying, like those people out there. Most of this is, you know, intimate partners. You know, it's people we know. You know, we need to, you know, boys out there need to realize it's their best friend, you know, who's telling them about, oh, this girl this weekend.
On from what Carmen said, I think last year with Uyanene's death, what really struck me, and still, I mean, continuously, is that you think it's predominantly, you know, people who are in poorer communities and are maybe uneducated and don't have those male role models. But it's actually so scary when, I mean, I went to Stellenbosch University and 2 of my best friends were sexually assaulted in one of the higher living areas. It's called academia. And you actually realize it's not just the poor communities, it's these boys who went to some of the best schools in the country. And it's just their way of thinking, and they don't think there's anything wrong with it. And they actually, need to be checked by us, but also by their friends, and also just that men really taking the reins and standing up for women and checking their friends and educating themselves and just really trying to be better. So that's what really scares me, is just these boys that are in your friendship groups. I mean, we literally were in the same block before going out on a night out with them, and I mean, they were part of my friendship group, and it was only years later that my two best friends came out about it, and a lot of the boys who were friends with them didn't believe them, and they said, no, he's such a good oak, he would never do that, you're talking bullshit, or stuff like that. So it's really scary to think that it's actually so close to home sometimes as well.
Yeah, just
and I think,
sorry, can I just chip in there? Is I'd like to say, like, rape apologists and people who, you know, are relaxing situations of rape and assault are the biggest problem. You know what I mean? As much as those people who are perpetrating this are the problem, if we had a society that completely ostracized this, I think it would, like, I don't know, it'd make the world of a difference, in my opinion.
Sorry, Combs, just to jump in there. I think it's also this whole idea of devil's advocate. And I struggle with it, I think, in almost any issue we're talking about, be it race, be it gender-based violence. Certain types of people enjoy playing devil's advocate in these conversations, and it's because they are so far removed from the problem. I think when you're talking about things like GBV, you'll speak to a man and you'll say, what is your biggest fear about going to prison? And they'll tell you, no, it's probably being raped. And you're like, that's our everyday fear. And they just don't get it because they're so far removed. It's frightening. Yeah.
And I think humans are just generally, they find it very difficult to think about a problem if it doesn't affect them directly, right? I mean, it's the same with Black Lives Matter, gender-based violence. It's like, from their lived experience, there's no empathy to be able to realize what it's like from the other person's point of view. And they only tend to care about things that affect them directly. And I think, like Carmen said, like, it goes down so much to the roots. And like, I mean, I feel like the best way to get through like a big group of people would be through the education system and through having that properly in place as like a foundation. But I mean, like, the only thing we learn about is like natural science. Here's the female organism, here's the male sexual organism, right? Here's a really scary picture if you have an STD, don't get STDs, right? Like, I think that's all I can remember from like sex education, right? There's so much more that needs to be done with that. And like, it's not just, and I think once again, people always think it's the poor people problem, right? It's the uneducated people problem. No, it's like, it's the guy next to you. It's the guy you went to high school with. It's the guy, Taylor said, that you went to university with, that you're friends with. Like, I have similar situations. It's people that you know that have like almost the same socioeconomic status as you. Yeah. Okay. Bob?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Taylor and Sunny was saying is that it's also that when it comes to people in our immediate group, it's always that, oh, I was intoxicated, oh, I was drunk, I didn't like, I wouldn't have done this if I was sober. And I feel like that's a way of them feeling comfortable with what they did as well. I think that's a huge thing in from my experience with the girls and people that I know have been sexually assaulted. And that idea that, you know, people always say, you know, you should come forward. But as we said, that Jess said here, 70% of the assaults are from people we know. How do you tell a friend group that this guy here sexually assaulted me, we can't hang out with him? And for some reason, then you end up being the bad guy because everyone can't be friends with him because you told your story. And also, just to go into another section quickly, like, while we're having this conversation about gender-based violence, we can't forget about the trans community. And I think that's one, especially in feminism too, where they kind of say, yes, go woman, and then exclude trans women, you know? So I think it's also to recognize their problems and their gender-based violence that goes on too, because it's just as bad as us, and that the conversation should include transgender women too.
Love that, Bob. Pilar?
I was just gonna say, I find it like almost, I know we are shifting the focus now more on telling men not to rape and not to assault. And for me, I just find it's like sort of, like, I'll never understand how men can't find a lot of the situations that they hear about, how they can't take them personally. I mean, I know they're not women, but it's kind of wild to me that you can read about something or see something in passing on your timeline, especially now that people are reporting violence more than, I feel like every year people report violence a bit more than they did before. And for me, seeing it on the timeline, it always affects me so personally, hearing about each of these stories. And I think, like many of you have been saying, it's like we deal with people in our own circles who are perpetrators of sexual assault and sexual violence. And I think men kind of like, if every woman were to say, like, if every woman who's been assaulted or, you know, violated were to say, I've been assaulted or violated, I feel like it would be so many women. I remember on Twitter, there was a day where people were just saying the age that they were sexually assaulted at. And it was so many women on my, so many women that I followed were saying like, this is the age I was. And it's just so, like, it's so crazy how women bear the burden of the assault kind of a thing. And it feels like men just, I mean, that is how it is. Men get away with it all, essentially. Because I mean, bail is 500 Rand, which is nothing in the bigger scheme of things. And, you know, men will always cover for men when it comes to sexual assaults, saying, oh, that's my friend, he would never, oh, this is that, he would never, oh, it was a misunderstanding. And I think on Twitter, there's also been people saying, oh, I've spoken to my lawyers, this is defamation of character, and trying to threaten people with legal action. So it's weird how now that we're kind of moving on to people like being more open with saying, this is what has happened, this is how many women are being assaulted, men, instead of choosing to listen and call each other out, it feels as if men are just becoming more and more defensive and saying, okay, I'm going to sue this person. Oh, I didn't do this. Oh, it was a misunderstanding. Oh, cancel culture isn't valid. You can't cancel me. Or like, you need to forgive me because I've apologized. So for me, it's just kind of like, how do we navigate, I don't know if I'm making sense, but how do you navigate now knowing who a perpetrator is, and now like how do they, I don't know, how do they express remorse, or how do they change, and how do they change in a way that you as a woman would believe and feel safe around?
Yeah, that's a heavy one. Yeah, and I think like a lot of guys say that why people get defensive is probably because they themselves were in a similar situation, and then they think back and they're like, oh shit, I was in probably a similar situation where lines were blurred. Or they think that they could also be in a similar situation and they don't want to be seen as someone who's committed gender-based violence or be a rapist or sexual assault, right? But I think that's in itself is a bigger problem, right? I think I've heard a lot of guys complaining like, oh, but now we need to be really, really like, I don't want to be falsely accused of rape. You know what I mean? Like,
or
that's
like
the issue.
You almost get scared now to have a discussion with, because some like men will be like, please tell me how I can do better. But now it's almost like this hesitation. I get hesitant to be like, don't do this, because I don't, like, imagine you're saying to a man, don't do this, and then they feel like, actually I did that, and then they get defensive. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, how do we honestly engage with each other to make this better? Like, I know it's just for like the mentorship program that you have, it seems like it's really working, but I think men maybe would struggle more with like me talking to a friend and being like, that's actually that's not good, that's not how you should treat a woman. I don't know how that would go down.
Yeah, and I think from experiences with that, guys tend to listen more when it's another guy telling them that, right? Because if it's a group of girls, are they just whiling? Like, you're just, just heard your friend and now you're just like taking this and oh shame, like imagine his career, imagine this, right? but I remember a situation where a guy had said that, and he was like, let's not talk to him for a while, let's hear the situation, whatever. And all the guys in the group were like, oh yes, brilliant idea. Which is frustrating.
Yeah, that's it. It's almost like a guy has to spearhead the calling out of someone, because if you call out someone as a woman, then it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Can I just add quickly to that? And it's also like, as Phila said, when women come out with their stories, and I think I saw a trend on TikTok where it was an empowering thing. It said, wear what you wore when you were sexually assaulted. And as she said, like, there was one woman, I think she was in her 30s, and she had like a little jumpsuit that a 5-year-old would wear, you know what I mean? But it's also that idea that if you tell your story, that you're going to always be a victim in someone's mind. Like, you're not just, I'm not Bobby anymore, I'm the girl that got raped, for example. That's the story, and that's the scary part too. So as you guys said, how do we have this conversation now? Because if guys can only understand because they feel sorry for us if we've been sexually assaulted, but then you don't want to tell them that you've been sexually assaulted because you don't want them to feel sorry for you, even though they might not say it in the back of your head. You'll always wonder, do they see me differently now? And that's a huge thing, I think, for women. When they say speak up and, you know, use your voice, it's also quite a scary and quite a vulnerable position you put yourself into.
And I also think there's a lot of stigma for the woman that's coming out about her story. You know, someone's going to think they have, you know, all sorts of relationship issues or intimate whatever, and you know, you think it's so empowering. But I mean, if you talk to women who've gone to our police stations, it's the most degrading, terrible experience. You know, so how, you know, we all like, go forward, tell your story, be powerful, but what do they have to deal with after that? You know.
And then the questioning around, like, what were you wearing? Did you go to a place that was like not safe? But then we get it because you were there at night. Like, it's sad, but it makes sense why it happened, right? Like, there's all these people try to rationalize why these things happened because you put yourself almost in that situation, which is like terrible.
I think also, as you guys have mentioned quite a lot with the men, they just don't get it. And I think I saw a video clip which has always stuck with me. And if they could put this into the education system and create more scenarios where they explain it like this, I think it would have an impact. It was a bunch of young boys sitting around us, and when it zooms in, you can't quite see what's happening, but from the sound effects and everything, you can realize that it is a girl being raped by a whole bunch of men, or boys taking turns, either having sex with her or doing something sexual. And they're all laughing and high-fiving each other, and it's all a big joke. And then it zooms out, and one of the boys has sat back slightly, and he's just got tears running down his face. And the other boys all look at him and say to him, you know, what's wrong with you? And he just looks at them and he says, that's my sister. And I think it just hits home for them. And I know when I do talks at schools, I always say especially the boy, well, only the boy schools, I say to them, I want you to answer this question honestly and without thinking, just say yes or no, whatever comes to your mind first. And then I say to them, would you rape your mother? And they all are horrified, and you all hear this, oh, sis, no, never. And then, would you rape your sister? No, never. Would you rape your aunt? No. Would you rape your brother? No. And then you say, then why rape somebody else's? And all of them, you just see this look on their face where their eyes just get big, and they're all like, shit, you know? So every woman is someone special. And unless you personalize it for them, like Bhavani, you were saying, if you don't personalize it, they switch off. Like when you scroll through a feed, it's just whatever, because it's like them looking at an ad for sanitary pads, you know, it's irrelevant to them. It doesn't happen to them. Why do they need to look at it? As soon as you personalize it and you remind them they've got a mother and they've got a sister and they've got a little brother or whatever, it kind of brings it home where it personalizes it. It's not just a friend of a friend of a friend. It's, oh crap, it's happening in my house. And I remember we did one of our first, I think it was our first, no, it was our second mentorship. It was absolutely horrific. I did my introduction, explained who I was and what we do and what the purpose of this mentorship was for the year. And one of the boys came up to me afterwards crying. And I said to him, what's wrong? And he said to me, I don't know what to do because my brother is a rapist. And I was just like, and he said, and I love him, and if I report him, I'm going to lose my brother. So what do I do? So I even didn't know what to do. I panicked, but luckily one of our mentors is a police officer. And I called Yanni in and I said, right, let's work with this guy together. And we explained to him that even though he is your brother and you love him, he is hurting other people. And how would you feel if someone was hurting somebody in your family? You would want them to be put away. And at the end, he ended up sharing his story with the rest of the boys. And it just makes such an impact. And again, it personalizes it. So I think it's an important thing to personalize it for these men and boys to make them realize more that it's real.
I think that's also frustrating in itself, that we have to say, oh, but imagine it was your sister or your mother, and then it becomes like, oh, now I get it. Like, why couldn't they just get it, just because it's another human being? But yeah, I do understand what like that does work, but it's frustrating that that's the way that we have to do it, right? Oba? Obake?
Sorry, Sunny. Yeah, I was actually typing in the chat, but I'm really captured by what you're saying. I think, and I completely hear where Jess is coming from, and I agree that when you have to, mete out this kind of activism, you have to personalize it for people who are you have a certain amount of privilege, right? But I think just in terms of, if we're talking about hypotheticals and trying to sort of dismantle that idea that it needs to be personalized, someone like me, for example, who is cis heterosexual, cisgender, I'm still able to respect the bodily autonomy of people who are non-binary or who are homosexual or transsexual, or not transsexual, sorry, transgender. And so it really, it makes me think, what is stopping men from really standing in someone else's shoes and practicing empathy, right? What is stopping them from doing that? Why is it that something has to be personal in order for the person to take action, if you get what I'm saying?
If I could respond to that, I think it always has to do to the idea, like, if you're on the top of the pyramid, you've never had to think about what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, right? Like, oh, but you're a female Black woman, right? You understand when you've been the not privileged person in the room, you've experienced discrimination, you know what it's like to fear for your safety. So therefore you can take that experience and take it and then empathize. But for men who are on the top of the pyramid for a lot of things, they've just never had to do that, right? So they just don't know how to, which is you're like, but they human, like, well, like how many years in, like, I don't know, since humans have existed, like, how is it not possible? But yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Like, the people at the top never have to interrogate why they're at the top.
And if I can, jump in again. I think it's also, for us, it's obviously gender-based violence is a very big passion for us, especially us right now on the screen. And if you just take a step back and you think about your Facebook feed, how many of you scrolled past an advert for Down syndrome or for suicide because it's not your passion and it's not affected. If you had a sister or a brother who had Down syndrome, you're going to stop and look at that post.
Right.
Because we're not personally affected by that, we might scroll past it. But gender-based violence is something very passionate for us, so it's something we take note of. So like with somebody for Down, I'm just going to use Down syndrome now as an example. If I had a brother or sister who has Down syndrome, I'm not going to automatically go, okay, well, every single person is interested in this. I'm going to push it on my Facebook. I'm going to tell my friends about it. I'm going to explain to my friends how it works, which is what us as a group are doing about gender-based violence. So I think that's what I mean by trying to personalize it and trying to get it out there, is more making people aware of it and making them understand it the way we do, because we are passionate about it. It jumps at us. We notice it more. We'll notice it on a billboard. We'll notice it here and there. But next time you guys are on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, just notice all the things you're scrolling past because it's not personal to you.
Touching on the point that you were talking about now, especially being at the top of the pyramid, and how almost like these characteristics like empathy and conscientiousness is not something that we formally recognize and reward. I mean, when we select for leadership roles, how often are things like empathy and conscientiousness brought into the table, where if you aren't a transgender, if you're not a woman, if you're not a Black person, can actually just understand, take a step back and actually be willing to open up space and listen to these people. So I think that's also a huge, and part of the psychometry issue that I've got with industrial psychology is when you're selecting for job roles and these sorts of things, which characteristics and traits are we hiring for those kind of job cultures that they're trying to, promote, and we want to, everyone must have a K-Way and a Garmin watch because then you fit in. But okay, how many of those guys are actually empathetic to allow women of color to be able to have a voice in the meeting room? It's something I'm extremely passionate about, and I so wish we had more of that.
I love that, because I'll just do a quick point here, just like on that, and then you get women of color joining the workplace, and then then companies are surprised when they leave, and they're like, how did we not keep them? We got them here. We're losing women of color, we're losing Black people, they don't want to be here. And then it's like this question of like, oh no, what are we doing wrong? But they don't realize what it's like to be that person in a room where people aren't as empathetic about your situation or don't realize these things, that you're going to want to leave, right? If you're not seen and you're not being heard. Comes?
Just going back to the gender-based violence and solutions to that, I think empathy and compassion is something we need to instill in young boys. I think it's children, the girl's crying and she's like, Mommy, I'm so anxious, this girl, that. But the minute the boy's saying that, it's like, oh, he's a bit of a loser, he's this, he's that. Let's start having the empathetic sons, the sensitive sons, let's drive that and encourage that. I think has to happen from really young.
Maybe I should start by just giving a brief definition of what period poverty is. Period poverty is basically a lack of access to sanitary products, menstrual hygiene education, facilities sanitation facilities, and waste management. And there's this cultural shame that's attached to menstruation, and there's a shortage of resources that stop people who menstruate from living their everyday lives. And we've realized that menstrual health and menstrual hygiene doesn't only affect women. Many people live without these basic sanitation, especially in developing countries, and they don't have the adequate hand washing facilities at home so that they can have a safe and dignified period. So period poverty is a very big issue that a lot of people aren't aware of, and especially now during this pandemic, it has worsened, especially for vulnerable groups like refugees, people with disabilities, people who are poor, and people who outside don't seem like they menstruate, but they do menstruate. So that is what period poverty is. And maybe Zama can tell us a bit about the SCORA period poverty campaign that went on.
Okay, so SCORA is a student-led, it stands for the Standing Committee on Reproductive Justice, right, Isma? It's a student-led organization from UCT, and it's all about sexual and reproductive health for women, for trans women, etc., etc. So we ran a campaign where we collected money to donate to 3 amazing initiatives. And basically the reason why we ran that is, as Isma was saying, the pandemic has kind of exacerbated existing period poverty. Also, just to say that period poverty seriously affects the physical and mental health of menstruators, and that it can be debilitating. Like if you hear people's stories with period poverty, it seriously affects their everyday lives when they have their periods. So it's a really important issue, and it's one to not overlook just because it doesn't affect us as a group. Yeah, I hope that's what you wanted, Isma.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, and I think Sunaina mentioned it earlier, where we kind of make it like an other issue just because you have access to like menstrual products, or you're able to menstruate in a safe and dignified way, that it kind of doesn't cross your mind. And I think we realized from the campaign, a few weeks before, we did period spills where people told their menstruation stories, and you just see how it affects people's lives, and it's every single month. So yeah, that was very interesting. I don't know if you guys have experienced any period poverty, or have any comments around that. That would be interesting to hear.
You know, so I personally wasn't as aware as I should be of period poverty. And I mean, you actually made me aware, Isma, on your Instagram pages, and from there I've started to look into it. And I mean, I can just imagine the dread, because I'm sure all of us have been on campus or in a space and have started our period, don't have anything with us, the panic, the horror, and it really is the most undignified situation. I can imagine if that is a monthly reality, an ongoing reality, it's just got to be the most terrible thing. And it shocks me that in this modern time we still haven't conquered this, you know.
Just to add to that, maybe one of the medical students can correct me a little bit, but I also know with like poorer communities, the way they kind of stop it as well. I mean, if you think of us in our privileged position, we have the option to choose between how many birth control pills, you know. And I think there's one where they give it to more disadvantaged communities, and it stops their period for 6 months. And what does that do to the body? It's just so that they can go to school and like their period can be lighter. And we don't really realize like the long-term effects of that, actually, of what it does to their body. And it's a short-term solution. Choose between so many birth control pills and know the effect of choosing the wrong birth control pill and what it does to our body, and giving girls an injection that stops their period for 6 months, you know, so that they can have access or be empowered as well to, you know, have sex safely and stuff like that. But what are they, at what cost?
If I can jump in and just add to that, it's such a good point. Also, just because women are poor, well, basically a lot of women use periods as a marker for health. So just because women are poor doesn't mean they actually don't want to have periods, just because they don't have period products. For example, a lot of women don't want contraception that stops them from having a period. I'd love to use something like that, but a lot of women think it's unhealthy to not have a period. So that in itself is violence. That just because now I'm poor, I should not, my best option is to not have a period, even though that's not what I determine best for me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I love that idea of how women use it as a marker of like being healthy, because I know I do it as well. There was a time when I was super underweight and I wouldn't get my period for like 90 days. So now whenever I do get my period, it's like, I'm like, yay, that means my body is doing what it's meant to be doing, and it means I have enough. My body's not in survival mode, basically. So yeah, and I think it goes back to the issue of like, because this isn't talked about as enough, that's why people don't know about it, or we don't know about period poverty, because it's such a taboo thing. Like, ooh, let's not talk about it. It's like this time of the month where we don't talk about it. And like, I try to do that, like, before, like it starts with us, like, even when you're younger. Like, I remember if you need to go to like change your pad during school, you'd have to like sneakily take your pad, you know, so like no one can see, or things like that, right? And like at home, like if I knew if my dad was going shopping, I would like, oh, I can't ask for pads or tampons. But if my mom was going shopping, then I would. And now like I just don't care, and try to have a younger brother, and I try him to see that as well. Wouldn't like sneakily go off to like get pads when we like go in like a family grocery shop. Like we all go get pads because this is a part of the natural way of living, right? Yeah, and I think it needs to really be that sounds a bit dramatic, but yeah, I think it needs to be less of a taboo subject about periods, because 50% of the population has them, right? And it's the reason why people are on this earth, because we do menstruate, right? So yeah. Cool. So Taylor, unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted to add onto what you said, Sunny. I think also with everything that Calms and Jess was saying earlier, and you as well, about in schools, when you learn, just in general, you bring up periods and the time of the month to boys, and they literally can't handle it. They like literally, they sit there squirming, they like start sweating, they literally look like they want to run out of the room. And I think it's so important to, like you said with your little brother, take him to go get pads too. Like, I know I'm going to need some on Wednesday, and Jean is going to go buy them for me. I'm going to ask him and he will do it. Like, you just got to normalize it, because I think, and I think especially in the poorer communities where you literally feel like you want to hide. And I even know, luckily for me, mine first came when I was at an all-girls boarding school. So I had a lot of people there to help me. But I know for a lot of my friends who first got their period in primary school and having to just being teased by the boys. And even now as an older woman, I mean, if you're on your period and you go to the beach, that absolute anxiety of, oh my goodness, is my tampon string going to come out? And someone's going to see it. And one of the boys around me is going to see it. And as girls, like pulling your girlfriend aside and being like, listen, will you like check for me? I don't want anyone to see. And just that ongoing stress of just, yeah, I just think it needs to be normalized a lot more.
Bianca?
Oh, no, I think period poverty, I think, is also such a multifaceted issue. And I think a lot of it speaks to just reproductive health and the lack of access that so many people have in all communities to information. I mean, I've got polycystic ovaries, and I know it's 1 in 10 women that have that. You get your period much later in life, the anxiety, the depression, the weight gain, there's so many issues that come with it. And I think as much as we create access to more help, more information to people, that doesn't cost you the price of a gynae appointment at Sandsing Clinic, you know. I think Dis-Chem's recently started having pap smears and breast examinations, and we really and truly need to start getting that access, not even only to our more urban areas, but to our rural areas as well. Like, something I'm super passionate about, but I just wish that more women had access to more information and felt comfortable in our bodies to understand what we're going through, no matter what we're going through. And I think that's quite a key thing. I'm sure, Zama, you see so much of that in the healthcare sector as well. So that's awesome.
I think also with the period poverty, it also comes to that thing is that just because someone's in a disadvantaged community doesn't mean they deserve handouts. Like, as someone that's privileged position, where, for example, when I went into dance, my dance teacher would be like, ew, you can see your pad, or something like that. And I would freak out because I actually just don't like tampons, you know what I mean? And I just think that the one thing about period poverty is that, yes, we collect, maybe we're doing a collection for pads, for example, but also that respecting the idea that just because they're poor doesn't mean that they should have to use pads, or that they should have to use tampons. And they should also be allowed to feel comfortable in what they're using. And I know that already getting access to sanitary pads and stuff is already a step ahead. Like, it's a check on the box, but also just realizing that it's more than just handouts.
And I mean, if they can be free condoms in bathrooms, they can be.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something people always speak about, right? Like, I just don't see how there's any difference to that. Bob, is anyone else want to say? Oh, Coms?
You know, I've recently taken like a journey of trying to get off the pill, and just the changes I've seen in my own body has been wild. And I think, you know, we really need to, as women, you know, stop listening to what society tells us to take and do and all of this, and really, you know, interrogate what we're actually putting in our body, you know. I mean, if you go and research the pill, the links between mental health and the pill, you know, I mean, I always used to be such a champion where I was like, oh, freedom, all this stuff. But now I'm thinking back and like the changes I've just seen from this month or two, you know, of experimenting with my body, it's been wild. And I think, yeah, I just think there's a lack of knowledge sharing when it comes to reproductive health of women. You know, why do I have to pay so much money to go see some top gynecologist to know just standard things like what the pill's doing to me, how my ovaries are doing, how everything's looking down there, you know, why is it such an exclusive thing, you know? And I also think this whole issue about periods and like gynecological health is, I feel like it almost dehumanizes women. There's like an aspect of it that I feel like, you know, you're just like a bleeding mess, like go over there. Like, no, I'm a human, I'm perfect, that's what I'm supposed to do. Yeah, I find that quite interesting.
Yeah. I love what you said, Coms, about the pill and the effect on the body. Like, I had the same experience. So I went on it because my period was really irregular and it was meant to make it more regular. So it's also the idea that the pill isn't just contraceptive, right? There's so many other aspects that people go on the pill for.
But it a fix-all for everything without addressing a lot of issues, you know. I mean, I started because I had polycystic ovaries. Cool, take the pill. But why didn't we try and fix that, you know?
Different alternative, having to go through that whole thing again of, you know, starting on something new and how it's going to affect your body and how it's going to affect your mental health and your mental state and all of that kind of stuff is, yeah, a little bit taking me out of it.
Can I just say, you know, I'm just sitting here just thinking hearing all your, you know, not so much your issues, but your, you know, just how you're voicing things. And I just think that young women today are in the most exciting place because of this online presence. And you can be so empowered by this, you know, that we've actually got a voice. We've got a voice that can be heard by millions. But your voice is so powerful and you have got such an opportunity. And I think it was Pila that I was listening to Pila in the beginning, and she was expressing herself by saying, you know, she doesn't want to paint issues like a rock. And Pila, just put a blanket around that rock, girl, because you've got so much ways of expressing yourself. And I think our vulnerability and our fragility is actually what empowers us. We must never, ever be scared to express that.
Love that. Thank you. Bob?
Sorry, I know that we're a little kind of diverting away from period poverty, but I think something that Carmen and Sunny just said is so important. And I think also there's one thing that girls have to experience is the idea of men's expectations when it comes to the pole. And it's the idea that the boyfriends put on girls, like, we have to protect ourselves. And how many decades has there been this idea of a male contraception in labs and that could almost work, and then never comes into our population and stuff? And they say, oh no, it's because of the health risks that it involves. And you read the symptoms and it's the same thing as the pill that they offer to females, you know. And that's also that male expectation on you that they want to have sex with you without a condom type of thing. And I have a friend whose mental health was deteriorating because of the pill, and it made her go into depression. But her boyfriend was so obsessed with the idea of having unprotected sex that he wanted her to stay on the pill. And that's that other thing that women have that pressure on too, is that do we put our sexual health over our boyfriend's expectations or the man's expectations or protecting ourselves? Because even though, like we said, that shit is a male contraceptive, we have to worry about ourselves because do we trust them? Yeah.
Isma?
I was gonna just talk about the options and stuff for contraception. I think Carmen and Taylor also mentioned it, and I think it's that we aren't told that we have options. I think everyone talks about the pill, but there's a range of options for contraception, and our doctors aren't telling us this. People aren't talking about it. And I think to empower ourselves, it's so important to know what our options are and to ask for those options. Often people say, yeah, the pill is the best, but best for who? We're all different. We all have our own, like you using the pill for irregular periods, someone else is using it for something else, etc. So I think to empower ourselves and other women is to start having discussions that there are options for everything, and we should feel comfortable to ask for those options. And yeah.
It just shows that we have so many resources and we still don't know so much. You can just imagine about people that don't have these resources, whether it's financial, social, that they can get to speak to people, right? And they have to deal with the same issues. It's like, I think also something that I've never really thought about, right? Because you're told to think about your own period so little that you don't even have the time to think about like the period of other women.
Got quite a bit to learn from the Jewish culture. I remember having a friend when I was much younger, and this whole thing of secrecy around menstruation. Yet with Jewish women, it's a celebration, and it's actually a time where women gather and they nurture each other. And when they finish their menstruation, it's a big celebration, and they go and help each other prepare. It's like a ritual of cleansing, so they can then go back to their man. And I think that's where we can learn from other cultures, that we can project ourselves as these, these different creatures with things like menstruation that are actually to be celebrated, because that's about our womanhood. It's about who we are and what we are, and we should bring our men alongside us and teach them stuff like that. That it's not to be poo-pah'd or hidden away from or disgusted by. It's a part of life, and it's a celebration of fertility and what mankind and womankind is all about.
I think in Indian culture, I was reading, it's a time where I think it's almost been misinterpreted over time, right? So things I've heard now is like, when you're on your period, you shouldn't be going to the temple. So I've heard that quite a bit, right? But it actually stems to the root of, you shouldn't go to the temple and you shouldn't enter the kitchen, right? But it actually comes from the root that when you're on your period, because you are literally losing blood and you can get tired, that the woman should be rested and celebrated during that time. And that's why she shouldn't be going to outdoors, shouldn't be going to the temple, shouldn't be cooking. And it's almost being like misinterpreted as, oh, she's dirty, so we keep her away from those places, right? I mean, I think there's so many cultural roots. Like that was just a brief thing I learned about recently. There's so many things to like really unpack, like the history of like the period. Yeah, Raisa?
So just on that you were saying about like a stigmatized idea of periods in general, and because you said Indian, it reminded me, I watched this movie, actually. It was an Indian movie, and it was called Padman. And it's obviously like, you look at that and you're like, okay, imagine being in India and like seeing this movie with this name, and you're just like, what? And I think we also just have to think about the privilege, not privilege, but the one good thing about where we are and the society that we live in. And I think maybe just specifically us, I can speak for us, is that we have that space where we can speak about these things. Because I mean, if you take that movie, which is meant to be like kind of a little snippet of what is happening in India and maybe rural India, you realize that there's a lot of people that are stigmatized every time they have their period. And like you said, the same thing happens where you don't have access to resources and you can't even ask for them in this country. So I think the fact that we can start conversations like this is just super important, and we're super lucky to be in that space and to occupy that space.
Does anybody like have or like know of like solutions to period poverty besides like collection drives and that sort of stuff? I don't know enough about it.
Okay, you can go, Zama.
No, go ahead, Isma. You go.
I was just going to say, some of the stuff that we've looked into is like sustainable products. So using like a reusable pad, giving people access to like the menstrual cup is one way to decrease period poverty. And another thing is having the conversation and educating people that this is normal. Having a period is normal, and when a period is no longer normal. So I think a lot of period poverty has got to do with education, and that in itself will empower women to start having conversations. And then thinking about sustainable products moving forward. And I think one of the organizations actually is doing reusable pads, and they're empowering women in the community to sew those pads as well. So yeah, I think there is a solution, and there are a lot of creative people doing creative things around that. Can go, Zama.
Also, just to say that period poverty is like a centuries-old thing for poor women. Women have all sorts of ways of dealing with periods, and it is mostly through reusable things. Like people use certain types of cloth for the longest time. There's all sorts of solutions, but as Isma was saying, what's important is also to recognize when periods are abnormal, because a lot of the people who struggle most with period poverty are the ones who will bleed through their cloth or things like that, like who have endometriosis, who have other issues. But because we don't talk about periods, and because we attach shame, or we do the whole, no, women are strong, like why can't you handle your period? Meanwhile, people actually have other types of pathology. Yeah, that also turns into a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to quickly add something. Isma, I actually would really love to be involved in your campaign, and I'm like, it is such a privileged position that we're allowed to talk about it, and we have this conversations that matter, but we need to have actions that matter too. And I feel that maybe everyone in this chat right now should be involved in what Isma is doing. I don't know who is and who's not, but I know I'm not, and I think we should all, because we don't know who will listen to this, at least we know we're making a difference by the fact that we took the time to talk to each other, and we're going to be involved in something after this.
Yeah. And that's great, because I think it segues nicely into our new point about feminism, activism, and discussion, right? Like just the broader umbrella of what we're doing. I'm happy to start that off with like maybe a bit of a story, but I know the idea of feminism has always, I know I'm a feminist, right? I remember bringing it up to my brother, and I was like, are you a feminist? I think this was maybe like 5 years ago, and he was like, no, I'm not a feminist. And I was like, why aren't you a feminist? And I got really, really angry at him. I think he was 10. And he was like, no, because feminism, like, it's just these angry women that just want like all of these things, right? And it just made me realize like this, he was 10 and he was already getting those ideas of like what feminism wasn't about, right? So, and then it just brings back to the idea of like, if he's 10 and he knows the wrong definition of feminism, he should be old enough to have the right conversations, right? So I definitely think that all these conversations that we are having, the activism around feminism needs to be something that children learn from a very young age, and shouldn't be something like, I feel like we've all on this call here have had to go through this own journey of self-discovery for a really long time, and then maybe after high school, after university, have come up with this picture of like, okay, cool, this is where we stand with these issues. But like, it would be great if these issues are taken to people that are younger, because that's already when they start in like to come up with opinions around that, right?
To add to that, Sunny, like you said, how you taught your brother, and I think there's a big things, and like normalize men saying I am a feminist. You know, we have so many women that we can agree that, I think in this whole group, that yes, we're all feminists, but I think there's this idea that men have sometimes when they say I'm a feminist, that men think that they're just saying it to attract women. You know, I've gotten this feeling that that's what they think. And I think they call it simping, I'm not sure, but that's the idea that, oh, men are just doing this to get women involved or like attracted to them and stuff. Well, to be fair, it is quite attractive when a guy says he is a feminist, because like I said, we get happy when men do the bare minimum. And like I said, this whole thing with feminism as well, that we need to include the trans community in this conversation too, because as like the example with J.K. Rowling saying that she supports women, but women who bleed, you know, then there's women, okay, normal women who don't bleed as well, but trans women were completely excluded from that. And I think women have to check themselves too. When you say, I am a feminist, I support women's rights, do you support trans women's rights too?
Yeah, love that. I think it's like the intersectionality of feminism, right? And it shouldn't just be white feminists, right? Yeah. Isma?
I think I just wanted to touch on the activism part. And I think for a long time, people are kind of shy to call themselves activists. It sounds like you have to be this like woke person that knows all the topics, that, you know, you can have an argument about everything all the time. And I think when we talk about activism, it doesn't have to be this big like idea around it. We're all activists in our own ways. We are activists about period poverty. We're activists about mental health. Those things are part of our brand. As women, we are activists, and we don't have to feel like because you don't have this title on Instagram that you're an activist, that you can't do the work or you're not doing the work. And we should start having conversations around that. What does activism mean, and what does it look like for different people? And like, what is true activism? And those are just some things we should think about as well.
Yeah, and also on that is not dictating your activism and how you show up as an activist on someone else. You know, I personally as an extrovert have to like check myself in that way. And then, you know, on the point of feminism, I think it's important to understand that, you know, feminism and the movement around that was started by Black women and trans women. And I think it's been whitewashed, and it's become this like cool thing to be like Taylor Swift and like, you know, I'm all for feminism and all of this now. But we've got to understand the history, why it came about, and who we're fighting for when we say feminism. Yeah, and I'm sure someone can elaborate more on that. So I talk a lot. So anyway. I also think it's become this thing. There's like two sides of feminism. It's one thing, it's become like a trend. And I'm like, it's not a trend. Like, this is something that people, you know, need. We like need this. It's a fight. It's not something that's cool to like say at like a dinner party, or for a celebrity to get on board sometimes. And I think the other thing is there's also, you know, we were speaking about the stigma earlier. There's a lot of stigma to feminism. It's literally just fighting for equality, you know. There's no more, you know. People think, now I need to grow my armpits out, I need to do this, I need to do that. Can we stop making this big thing and just, you know, cut it simple?
I just wanted to add quickly, I don't know if you guys saw the other day, but the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda, passed a bill for I think is amazing. And that also, I was actually going to add that to our discussion when we said what makes us feel empowered. And I think adding on to that, when women around the world, I don't know who said it, I think it was you, Sunny, when you said when women who look like you and women of color get promoted or doing amazing things and being celebrated and seen for that, it makes you feel empowered. And I think for me as well, just women around the world being promoted in top companies or passing amazing bills like this, or getting into positions like Prime Minister, it makes me feel so empowered as a woman. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
She said the quote that you can be compassionate yet strong. And that's what I love mostly about Jacinda. When she said that, I'm like, yes, that is it. It's this idea that, yes, women are strong, but we are so, there's women that are compassionate too. And that's a big thing that Jacinda said. And I'm glad that she brought it into the conversation.
Yeah.
Her big fan. She's literally such a badass. She's like a new mom. She's a prime minister. She just like kicked COVID's ass in New Zealand. She's just awesome.
Yeah. And like her quotes, so I have like a lot of sticky notes in my room, and like her quotes are like one of my sticky notes, because like coming into corporate, there's the idea to be successful, I have to like emulate a white man. So I have to be like really loud, very extroverted, need to be like cracking jokes all the time, having really good banter and things like that. And I had like a very big, like I'm still having it, of like a crisis of like, I want to be successful in corporate, but I want to do it with my own traits, right? Which is being really like I like being vulnerable, I like being empathetic, I love being caring, I like being the person in the room that's not the loudest, but would rather go to the person who's the quietest and talk to them. And it's like, that doesn't seem like it fits in the world's idea of what like a boss ass person is. Yeah, so I just love that she's like changing the definition of what a successful person is. Yeah. Raisa?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because what I was thinking is kind of what you guys are all saying is what Carmen was saying about equality, is that for me, that's what feminism is. And it's kind of, if I speak about it, that's what I'm speaking about. But it's equality in the sense that like equality doesn't necessarily mean the same. It means you're both powerful to the same extent in your own right. So just because females have different strengths and men have different strengths, that's what makes them equal. You know, everyone's got strengths, everyone's got weaknesses, but my weakness doesn't, not my weakness, something that makes me doesn't make me less strong than a man. So I think things like how you guys are talking about Jacinda is like her caring nature, and that's something that I think we always kind of pin as a female thing. Something like that can be so empowering, like compassion. So I think those are things that we need to hang on to, and when we think about empowering ourselves, is that our differences, it sounds cliche, but that's what makes us stronger, essentially, at the end of the day. So yeah.
It's hard. I think we navigate this very patriarchal society, still trying to figure out what it means to be a feminism, and obviously we try and do it so cautiously and trying not to step on anyone's toes. It's like how to be an attractive feminist, so that you don't upset anyone, and it's a hard thing. And Sunny, you were speaking about just like being in corporate, and for me, I feel like there's such a thing about being almost trying to be this attractive white woman in corporate as well. So like being a little bit more curvaceous, how do you fill up that sort of space? It's that intersectionality is so important in every space that you go into. And that's why I'm such a firm believer in being able to be yourself, but is the way that you're yourself able to make other people feel like they can show up as their best selves as well. So again, just the biggest thank you for this conversation. But again, just keep going out and boldly implementing your ideas, guys. The world stands in great state with all of you. So what's it up?
About, yes, feminism is just, it's down to just wanting equality, you know, and like as I said, you know, equal energies type of thing. But you know, when men say, oh yes, they're all about equality, yes, but how many of us have heard from men saying, oh, she's probably going to get it because she's a woman? You know what I mean? Like it's that whole thing again where it's yes, you're about equality, but you're upset if the fact that you have less space in the workplace, so that you probably might be considered less for a job if they could fill it by a woman role, even though that isn't true, because what I've been seeing so far in the work world is not really that case. But the fact that we've been going through varsity hearing men say that, and then them saying that yes, they believe that men and women should be equal, and then that kind of happens. But yeah, anyway, the rest of this discussion has been so eye-opening, and like hearing everyone's opinions, different walks of life as well. It's been really enlightening for me as well, just hearing and also adding to my body of knowledge of what you guys have been speaking about.
Okay, go team. Anybody else?
I can go next.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think this has been such a